Hello everyone, it's Greg from Edinburgh Renaissance Fencing Academy here. In today's video I want to talk about blade flex in training swords for historical fencing or HEMA. This is a topic I've touched on before in an older video about training swords, but recently I've been looking at some options for training weapons which are on the market now. And I just wanted to do a specific video on the topic of flex to really hone in on this issue, because it's something that's really important to think about when you're looking to purchase a new training sword. Okay, so basically I'm going to compare two training swords today, one with a stiff blade and one with a very flexible blade. And I'll examine the performance of these in a few different little experiments. Let's start with the sword with a stiff blade. So that's this one. So I'm going to demonstrate how stiff it is with a couple of tests first of all. So begin with a simple pressure test. So placing the tip on the ground, and I'm going to apply pressure with my hand here straight down. And you can see there's only a little bowing of the blade. So second test is what I think of as a waggle test. So I'm basically just going to hold the sword out like this and move it quickly from side to side. And as I do this, hopefully you can see that the blade maintains its straight alignment. So it's not deforming or whipping from side to side like this. So essentially this sword has a flex which is quite similar to original period pieces that I've handled in museum collections. So there's just enough flex to ensure that it's not going to shatter if it takes a really strong impact in this direction, but it's otherwise very stiff, and the blade does not deform during actions. Okay, the second sword is this one, so it's the very flexible blade. So first of all, the pressure test. You can see how much bowing there is of the blade there. And then the waggle test. So if I do this, hopefully you can see that the tip of the sword is whipping backwards and forwards, and the blade is actually bending this way and this way along with the motion of the sword. So basically it deforms or bends, it does not maintain its straight alignment. Okay, next I'm going to perform a simple fencing test with the two swords, starting with the stiff-bladed one. So I'm going to hold the sword like this, so it's in a kind of neutral position with the blade aligned like so the cross guard's directly up and down. This is essentially the most common neutral on guard position in a lot of rapier fencing, particularly in Italian rapier fencing. So the sword spends a lot of time like this. So I'm going to apply pressure on the blade to simulate something like a parry or engagement or even a beat by using this dagger. So I'm going to use the edge of the dagger to push the blade in this direction. The dagger, by the way, is completely stiff and rigid. So, contact, pressure. So it pushes the sword aside, and then I remove the dagger, and the sword is like so. So the whole weapon has been levered to one side. So neutral, contact, pressure, and that's the final position of the weapon. Now, let's compare that with the flexible sword. Same hand position, neutral position, dagger, contact, pressure, and then remove the pressure. And the sword is in the same position as it was to start with. Contact, pressure. Okay, so what's happening? The pressure from the dagger is causing the weak, the déballé of the sword to actually bend out to the side. Let's do it again, like so. But the lower part of the sword, the forte and the hilt, are not actually moving. So the dagger, in other words, is only displacing the upper part of the sword. And this is, of course, due to the high degree of flex in the blade. So what is the significance of this? Well, firstly, the flexible blade is clearly safer because if you thrust somebody very hard, the blade will simply deform and absorb a lot of the force. However, when this blade interacts with other blades, like the dagger in our example, it does not behave like a real sword. So imagine a situation where you're holding your sword in some kind of guard stance and the opponent tries to beat or engage this blade in the manner I just showed. It's going to displace the tip, but not actually the forte and the hilt, while applying exactly the same pressure to a stiff weapon will actually cause the whole weapon to open up like this. That is a very important and significant difference. Fundamentally, this sword will not react like a real sword during engagements, beats, disengagements, and parries. It's too flexible. Now, this blade is very safe, of course, for use in high-speed, high-intensity competitive situations like tournaments, but it doesn't act like a real sword. The other weapon does. So the blade in the other weapon is actually much better for trying to do correct, authentic historical fencing techniques. If you try it with this sword, probably just won't work very well. And I'm speaking from personal experience. This sword does not act like a real sword. I can't emphasize it enough. Now, the production of a sword blade like this is ultimately a choice of the manufacturer. It's a conscious choice which is made during the production process. The blade doesn't have to be like this. And the difference in flex is not because of the different blade shapes of the two swords that I demonstrated. It's to do with the characteristics of the metal, of the steel, and how it is treated during manufacturing. You can make a blade like this one, which is very stiff, and you can make a blade like the other one, which is very flexible. So what I want to say to you all today is when you are choosing a sword blade, I strongly recommend that you choose a stiff sword blade like the first one, unless you're taking part in a tournament which has specific requirements for flex. But outside of that context, a stiff blade is much better and will actually improve your fencing and your understanding of fencing. Last thing I'd like to say is this problem or issue is not restricted to swords with steel blades. So here I have a partisan with a synthetic head. So if we do the same pressure test, you'll see there's a ridiculous amount of bowing in this blade. And in fact, when you try to use this to fence, one of the key techniques in Italian partisan fencing is to beat aside the opponent's weapon to open up their defense. If you beat this blade on the flat, your beat will just travel straight through the blade, bending it to one side without actually displacing the weapon. So again, this is actually a serious technical problem if you want to fence properly. And once again, this was a specific design choice by the manufacturer when they made this piece of kit. This plastic does not need to be this flexible. Something to think about if you're going out there to buy training equipment. Make sure you buy the right stuff for what it is you want to do. All right, that's all for today. Take care, everyone. Bye.